There it is.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Raven and the Writing Desk. I'm your host, Chris Lester, the creator of the Metamor City story universe. You can find more of my work at metamorcity.com and chrislester.org. I'm here in the virtual studio today with author and podcaster A.F. Grappin. Hi, Gus.
Hi, Chris.
So, Gus is just about to, or are you just about to release, or have you already released your new book?
It's available for pre-order. Official release date's the 26th.
Okay. So, are you hearing that?
Hearing what?
Just a moment. I'm getting audio from something else. Yep. Okay. Aaron Sorkin was suddenly appearing in my ears, and I'm like, what's going on? Oh, the YouTube channel is playing an ad. All right. So, why don't we start out, Gus, by having you tell us about your new book and what it's about?
This is the first of a novella series. It's called LUC BERTRAND, Assassin's Victim. This is a spin-off of John Walker's The Stratford Chronicles. He asked me to write the backstory of one of his secondary characters who is, in the books, the head of assassins for the East Coast of the United States. So this is the very beginning, showing how he gets on the path to becoming an assassin in the first place. But it is set in France because that is where he is originally from. So you get to see what kind of trauma he goes through and how he goes from being victimized by an assassin to becoming one himself.
If you're victimized by an assassin, doesn't that mean you're dead?
Not necessarily. You can be victimized in more ways than actually being assassinated.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So
I did consider calling it Assassin's Target, but I was like, nah, let's go worse than that.
So lay this out for us. What kind of a world is this? Is this magical, like urban fantasy, magical realism? Is this straight up action thriller? What's going on?
The original series, The Stratford Chronicles, is very much urban fantasy. It's the main character, Tom Stratford, is the private detective to the gods. So we see everyone from Zeus to some of the Chinese mythological deities. We've seen Valkyrie. I mean, we've seen he's done so much research into different mythos and getting all these different gods involved. So this is set in a world where the gods do actually speak with people, but Luke actually does not deal with any of that. So this particular spinoff is very much more just urban adventure almost. It's a little more actiony.
Okay.
Without the mystic to it.
So magic does exist in this world, but it's on the margins enough that it doesn't have to show up in this particular story.
Yeah, it's not really going to. It does lie in the very deep background, but Luke is pretty oblivious to it for a long time.
So go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say what we're focusing more is just how to become an assassin, as opposed to dealing with the gods themselves.
You say we. Did you and John collaborate on the development of the plot, or did you come up with this on your own?
What actually happened is about a year and a half ago, John approached me asking me just to write a short story about Luke. And I was asking for details, and he says, no, I'm just going to let you run with it. And if there's anything that doesn't fit, then we'll fix it. So he's been giving me free reign, and that's pretty much what happened initially when he asked me to write the novella series instead. He fell in love with the story that much. He's like, yeah, I need more. So we've collaborated some on the overarching story of Tom Stratford, how Luke fits into that. And so I'm basically just building up to that point, because this series takes place at least 2 decades before the first book of the Stratford Chronicles, because Luke is in his 30s at that point. And in this first book, he's just turned 15.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's prequel spinoff.
What is it like writing a story like that, where you know where the ending is, but you don't have any direction on where it starts or how it gets there?
It was actually I don't want to say I have trouble with endings, but endings are very difficult for me. So having that point where, because I've got 7 novellas planned right now, and the 7th one is where he actually finally meets Tom. There's a small spoiler, but this is Luke's story. We don't care about Tom. So actually knowing where things go once he knows who Tom is in the first book of the Stafford Chronicles kind of gave me a beacon to aim for. And I was able to work backwards from there instead of just kind of starting in nowhere and working forwards. I've actually found it very liberating. It is daunting that I don't know the world as well as John does, obviously. I mean, I've read all the books, but I'm not an expert on the Stafford verse. So I'm constantly sending him chapters and being like, does this work? Does this work? But he keeps on coming back with all this, oh my gosh, I never thought of that feedback.
Ooh.
So it's sort of turning into a collaborative thing. And he actually admitted to me, and John, sorry if I'm letting loose a secret, but Luke was never meant to be that big of a character in the Stafford Chronicles. So I've had that effect on the series, and that kind of makes me smile.
So was this like, how did the partnership get started? Like, did you just fall in love with this character and say, I really want to know more about this character's story? Or like, if it wasn't that important of a character until you got your hands on him, how did you end up writing a novel or a novella about him?
When I first started reading the Stafford Chronicles, Luke just became my favorite character. I've always had a soft spot for the lesser known. I mean, everybody likes the hero. Everybody loves the villain. But Luke was, in so many ways, an unknown, especially in the very first book. He had a very small role in the first book, but he was so intriguing because, number one, he was a Frenchman living in Virginia.
Mm.
He's, an assassin who runs a club, who has all this knowledge and hates Tom, hates the man. But as the series went on, he grew just in these little tiny bits and pieces where you see him, and he was just my favorite, hands down. So John knew that, and so when he was looking for short stories based on the side characters, he approached me, and he's like, "Yeah, I want you to write on Luke," and I'm like, "Are you sure?" But like I said, he's fallen in love with it. I mean, I never would have thought of doing this. He's the one that approached me, which extremely, extremely daunting. Just I'm like flattered. Can I do it? I'm not that good of a writer. But he disagrees.
But you've had other books that were released before this, right?
I've got 3 books out right now. It's actually been a while since I've published anything, so this kind of broke my drought. My first science fiction fantasy young adult crossover, Impetigo, I released back in 2010. And then Mere Acquaintances, which is that was a project unto itself, but it was a or a fantasy kind of alternate reality kind of book, and that one I would intentionally released for free because it's unedited. That was the point of it. I actually got all these ideas from all my friends all over Facebook and everything. They named the characters. They gave me basic ideas that they wanted to see a novel about, and I took as many of them as I could and put them together, and I was releasing a chapter a week. So it was kind of like Christian Ellis's Phyllis Esposito. You can't go back and change stuff because it's already been publicized. So that one is intentionally released for free, so you can actually get that one pretty much anywhere. And then that was also in 2010. And then my epic poem, The Trials of Halleck, I released in 2011, which I'm working on getting that out in ebooks right now. But yeah, so those are the only books I've had out before now. I have had a couple of short stories out in podcasts and a couple anthologies, but this is my first novella.
Cool. What was the most rewarding thing about writing in somebody else's universe, and what was the most difficult thing about it?
I really like that I don't have to come up with character details as much. I mean, Luke's description is already set. His personality is very set. I mean, yeah, I'm getting to develop the man he comes into, but I've got so much I can reference. And I just had something else I thought of, and then I forgot it. But it's like I've got this great resource in John and in his editor Erica, because I mean they know the universe. So if I've ever got a question, I can go to them. One of the hard parts is that being American and not having traveled any farther than the continental U.S., I have no idea what Europe is like. And I'm writing in France. I'm writing Paris, Madrid. I've gone to Madrid. I'm going to be going to either Ireland or Germany at some point in this series, and I'm not sure which yet. So I've got to do like all this weird research. I found myself researching for not the first novella, but for the third one, the Madrid subway.
Mm.
Just I'm finding myself doing all this weird stuff. I'm like, I want to be writing, but I need this information to write. So that's actually been weirder than doing anything in the shared world. Because this is so far set from the main series, I do get a lot of freedom, but I do get a lot of constraints because I have to make sure that I don't do anything that's going to ruin the world before John does.
No breaking the world.
I don't get to break anything yet.
Do you have access to like a story Bible or a wiki or anything like that for for this universe?
As far as I know, if John has one, he hasn't shared it with me. But I mean, I've got the books. Like I said, I'm good friends with John. I can private message him anytime and just say, "Hey, this." Or I can, like I said, I can talk to his editor who knows the world at least as good as he does. So I've kind of got live resources there as opposed to a Bible. But like I said, it's just because the series happened so far before the actual Stafford Chronicles that I don't really have to reference a whole lot of details in that. We have had a couple incidents where I can go, oh, this can kind of hint towards something that Luke does in the third book. It's like that's where he gets that behavior. But it's not really. I'm not having that kind of constraints with this project, fortunately. It's not like as if I were writing in, say like the Dungeons and Dragons universe, where set things happen and I have to make sure I'm not messing with those events or anything. It's actually I'm getting a very loose leash here.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, this world is enough like ours that you are constrained by real world history and events.
Yeah, and especially because, like I said, researching the subway, I'm up to 1997 at this point. So yeah, I can find all these pictures of what the Madrid subway looks like 20 years ago. That's a little bit harder.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just it being this, our world basically, just with some supernatural stuff peppered in it. I've got a lot of Facebook resources that do live in Europe, so I can just ping somebody and say, "Hey, have you ever been to Madrid? Have you ridden the subway there? Did you do it 20 years ago? Because that would be more helpful." But so that's one reason I'm actually considering taking the trip to Germany or Austria instead of Ireland, is because I got a couple friends that do live in Germany and Austria. I'm like, that would be so much easier. Got people that live there now and are my age, so they might remember it from being teenagers.
Right. So what kind of, other than people who live in the place where you are looking, what other resources have you drawn on for that kind of research?
A lot of Google. I'm mostly just like running through as much Google and like Wikipedia as I can, because fortunately I'm not needing a lot of details. I'm mostly just needing the feels of places, because that's one thing that's really liberating about novellas is I don't have a lot of space to do all these big descriptions and really have the setting necessarily be a character like Serenity is in Firefly. I mean, that ship is its own character. I don't really get that freedom here. I mostly just need the feel of the places. So I'm able to get a lot of that, just the atmosphere from pictures, new, old, whatever. So fortunately, for the most part, Google does a lot for me.
Cool. We're going to open up an offer now for people who are watching this to submit their own questions for Gus. If you are watching this on Google Hangouts on air or on the YouTube channel, on the right side of your screen, you should see a group chat window. If it isn't there, you can move your your mouse over to the left side of the window, and the little pop-up will appear with a series of commands, one of which is chat. If you click on that, you'll open up the chat window and you'll be able to see what people are saying in the chat thread. So if you have a question for us, go ahead and post it there, and then we will answer questions as we get them.
Yes.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your writing regimen? Do you write every day? What kind of environment do you use, et cetera, et cetera?
I am very fortunate that my day job is not as mentally draining as it used to be, so I'm able to write every day. And the call center where I work has a quiet room that is literally on the other side of a wall from my cubicle. So on my lunch break, I can just zip right over there. It's not behind you, Chris. It's okay.
I'm looking for my water glass.
There's a chance this is vodka. But I can just, as soon as I go on my lunch break, zip around that wall, go in there, pull out my laptop, and write for a good 45, 50 minutes before I have to come back to work, which again, it only takes me 2 minutes to get back to my desk. So I'm guaranteed at least 45 minutes of good writing time in the middle of the day. Sometimes my job is so dead that I'm able to kind of scribble a paragraph here and there. But I do the best I can to write at least 1,000 words every day. Some days, I mean, it averages out. Some days are better than others, especially if I'm revising. I mean, you don't really generate a whole lot of words that way. But I spend at the very least, an hour every day just at my lunch break, and then anything else I get is bonus. Fortunately, I'm actually a pretty fast writer. I think I've actually whipped out 2,000 words in an hour before. Not saying that they were any good, but I can be very prolific, which you can't edit a blank page. So going through on revisions is always better than just sitting down and writing for me.
And the worst words are the ones that you don't write.
Yeah, exactly.
I have noticed that on the Magic spreadsheet, you have an entry about 2 spaces above or below mine to keep track of your daily word counts, and you haven't been using it. Are you ever coming back? I miss you.
I gave that up. It was a couple of years ago because I had an amazing streak that ended up getting broken because I went to Disney World. I've actually since just started tracking it on my own personal spreadsheet, where I don't necessarily get the streak, but I keep track of the project I'm working on, how many words I get on an individual project every day, and then I just average my words for the month that way. So it just got to a point where the Magic spreadsheet was getting too laggy for me. And I was sitting here spending 5 minutes trying to update the Magic spreadsheet. I'm like, I could have written a paragraph. So it's not looking too terribly likely that I'll be back. If I did and I went back and retroactively entered all my writing, it would probably be pretty scary. Because I've got my own personal spreadsheet back to 2014. So pretty much right after I left the Magic spreadsheet. Actually, I think while I was at the Magic spreadsheet, I'd started my own. But it also really helps tracking that way because I can see when I started writing a particular novel and when I finally wrote the last of it. So I can see how long it took me to write a draft. Like I've got a trilogy that's going to come out the end of 2018, 2019, 2020 through the Ed Greenwood group. And the second book of it, I just finished a month ago, the first draft. And I think it took me almost exactly 6 months to write that first draft. So just having that, like, okay, trying to help just kind of helps me meet deadlines better to know exactly how much to expect with my writing pace. Which was, like I said, a little bit more specific than the Magic spreadsheet, just the general word count. So I do miss it. I miss seeing all those points. But nah, I don't think I'm coming back.
So you mentioned something that leads into my next question, which is about your next project that you're going to be working
on. That doesn't even take in consideration all the projects I'm working on now, Chris, because
tell us about those too.
Okay, the second LUC novella, don't put this in concrete. But the second Luke novella, which is Assassin's Rival, is hopefully going to be out in January 2017. I'm currently writing the third one, which is Killer Assassin, and I'm hoping that one's going to be out probably late third, early fourth quarter of 2017. Like I said, I've got 7 plans so far, so I'm making progress. I'm also working on, like I said, this trilogy for the Ed Greenwood Group, which the
And what's
3
that
books.
about?
This is a setting. Um, I'm actually not sure how much I can talk because I am under an NDA. It's a science
Oh,
fiction. It's a science fiction game of tag gone wrong. I can tell you that much.
okay.
And the titles of the 3 books are: the first one is called Lord Escort. The second one is called Pollywampus and the Warble Marbles, which I just love saying. And the third one is called
What was
Breaking
that
News.
again?
Pollywampus and the Warble Marbles.
Got it. And the third?
And the third one's called Breaking News. Hang on, I'm just gonna write this in the chat because it's awesome. But it's that the second one. I wasn't even planning on making this a trilogy. Warble. I made that plural. But I wasn't. I was just gonna be a standalone book, and then I started some of the details I was coming up with in this first book. I was like, oh my gosh, I've like created this whole band, and they've got all this music that keeps on getting mentioned. I need to write a behind the music. So I've written a science fiction behind the music book, which is what that one is. And then I'm like, well, now I have to close the trilogy. So I made more work for myself than I needed to. Um, Other projects going on right now, I have a YA fantasy novel that has 2 working titles because I haven't even settled on a real title yet. That is all exploring fate versus free will in one young teenager boy's life, and also involves fairies. Um, hoping to have that released by the end of 2016. And then I have a fantasy courtroom drama that I've been working on for a few years that, if doesn't get picked up by a publisher and agent by the end of this year, I'm just going to publish next year and be done with it. But that one's called Criminal from Birth, and that's kind of been my pet project for a while. As far as next stuff I'm going to be writing, I have a novel that I'm planning once I get this YA and Criminal from Birth off my plate. It's a fantasy, because why write is fantasy? It's a fantasy about a priest who has been away preaching for 30 years. So he's like 50, 55 years old, and he finally comes home to his country, which is theocratic, only to discover that the god that he's worshipped his entire life has been killed.
Oops.
Don't you hate it when that happens?
Ugh, so inconvenient.
But that's my working title on that is Faithful. So I'm looking forward to really writing that one.
So this but it's still a theocracy. So the deity's position has been usurped by someone else.
It was a multiple theocracy.
Oh, okay.
So he's just one of the 2 gods, and he has been killed and replaced. And the priest's name is Wit. He's not happy about it.
No, one wouldn't be, I would
No.
imagine.
Yeah.
We've got some new viewers in the YouTube channel now. Welcome. I'm speaking here with author AF Grappin. If you are interested in asking any questions of me or Gus, go ahead and post them in the chat room, in the chat feed there on the right side of your screen, and we will address questions as we get them. So Gus, you appeared this past Balticon in Jared Axelrod's panel Queering the Feed about writing LGBT characters. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about sort of the personal roots of that for you, and how and why and where you incorporate LGBT characters into your fiction.
Well, for those of you who don't know me, I am agender. Are you familiar with the Wheel of Time, Chris?
I know of its existence, but I have not read any of it.
Okay. I was going to make a Wheel of Time reference to my gender, but basically, I'm not necessarily gender queer. I just figure I kind of fit both genders while at the same time fitting neither. So that has, considering homosexuality and heterosexuality, that's all based on what your gender is. So I can't really apply either of those labels to myself because my gender doesn't fit. So it just lots of confusion there.
This is why I
Uh,
like the terms that I use in Metamor City, which are androsexual and gynosexual.
mhm. So I'm figuring gynosexual would be attracted to women.
Correct.
I am a gynosexual, dude. I will. Actually, I need to use that. Um, just oh my god, it makes so much more sense. I didn't even think about it. Yes, I am an agender gynosexual. I am totally like that is awesome. Um, but so having been so ridiculous, I was convinced I was transgender
Mhm.
for I'm 32 for probably 29 years of my life. Because I mean, some of my first memories are of wishing I weren't a girl, wishing I hadn't been born female. But going into men's bathrooms is just as weird.
Mhm.
So having that much confusion and that kind of hatred towards labels really makes me. I'm trying to think how to put this. Um, it just makes me super aware of my character's masculinity and femininity, and while at the same time not defining them by it.
Mm.
Because I didn't create Luke, but Luke is bisexual. John told me that off the bat, and I'm like, oh, I actually didn't pick that up in the Stafford Chronicles. But then again, he's not a main character, so it hasn't really come up yet.
Right.
But it's given me a lot to play with as far as his upbringing is concerned, and you know, writing his story, his romances. I'm getting to explore. I don't really write a whole lot of relationships in my books. I'm mostly uh, being so agender and not actually part of the dating scene right now, it's very hard for me to find romance that critical to living. So I don't put it in my novels that much, but I need to do that with Luke because he has relationships, and as an assassin, that's a great way to get close to somebody.
It's true.
Um, so it's actually helping me spread my wings that way. As far as my other projects, I don't know that I've actually put a whole lot of obviously um, LGBTQIA, whatever. I can't even
Cool
remember all of them.
bag.
Yeah, yeah. Um, um, I haven't, like I said, I haven't knowingly put a whole lot in my books. But in Criminal from Birth, geez, my main character, Silent, he is in his 30s. He's a virgin. It's like
Mhm.
I've done some weirdness that way. I just, when I first started writing that book, his sexuality never crossed my mind. Um, because for me, a lot of that kind of stuff doesn't. I mean, in my personal life, it does. Don't get me wrong, but in my characters, I'm like, why does that have to be important to them? So it's kind of iffy. It's kind of weird for me that way because I've actually started reading romance and hope that I might, I don't know, spark that in my head and actually make some relationships happen. Um, but I don't see how. I say personally, I don't see how writing, say, a gay male, two gay guys romance or just relationship is going to be that different from writing a male female one. I mean, they're people.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think and honestly, for me, that's the thing that gets me the most is just that they don't think that we're people. They think
Who's the
that
they now?
pretty much anybody that mentions it in the media.
Mm.
Just in general, so many people think, well, as a gay person, what do you think of this? Well, I don't go around thinking, as an agender gynosexual, what do I think of this? I think, as me, what do I think of this? So it's just I personally hate the labels, and yet I'm constantly labeling myself. So it's
I think that this comes back to sort of the era of second wave feminism and the whole that slogan, "The personal is political,"
mhm,
and we got into this mentality where to um, diversity of gender orientation, etc. was to define people by it, and
Hmm.
like you couldn't be a feminist without it shaping every aspect of your personal life, and your personal life being a commentary on your politics.
Hmm.
And now, it's become the same way for sexual orientation and gender identity and all the rest of it.
Now, I'm not gonna lie. When I was in my teen years and up into my mid 20s, I could get pretty hostile about people not using male pronouns with me just because the female didn't feel right. The male pronouns have always felt more neutral to me, which we could get into a whole conversation about that.
Right.
Um, but it, it finally got to the point where, once I finally realized I wasn't actually transgender, I was agender. I'm like, you know what? Call me what you think I am. I'm just more comfortable that way because I don't mind the singular they. I have a lot of friends who have called me it forever, and I think it's hilarious.
That
Um,
seems very dehumanizing.
but it doesn't bother me. Well, my sense of humor is ridiculous. So, I mean, I think it's hilarious anyway. The singular they doesn't bother me, despite being a little bit of a grammar Nazi myself. But like the XIE, ZE pronouns,
Mm-hmm.
those grate on me. To me, those just seem pretentious, but that's just my personal preference. You can call me he, I'll answer. You can call me she, I'll answer. Either way, it doesn't feel right to me, but I want you to be comfortable. I mean, if you're not comfortable, I'm not comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that's just my personal preference. When I think of myself, I tend to think he, but I mean, I'm not going to go get anything added. I don't need the accessories. I've got enough problems without all that mess.
Trust me, it's nothing but trouble.
I'll take your word for it.
You
But
so
no,
you
what's
mentioned what's that?
I was gonna say what's funny though is I'm the middle child of three. My older brother and my younger sister, for years now, we were raised Catholic.
Oh boy.
My brother and sister for ages have called me their girl brother or boy sister, which I'm like, it's accurate, but my parents hated it. But they've come to terms with it, so it's all good. But just like boy sister, it's about right. I mean, I was my brother's best man. Two sets of quotation marks. So I mean, it's all good. I don't see why people can't do that more often. Why does it have to be all that traditional crap? But we digress. You had another question.
Well, I was going to ask, you had mentioned that you were very aware of your character's gender identity while not defining them by it.
Mhm.
So when you're fleshing out a character for the first time, like what are the qualities or sort of like the perceptual filters and lenses that you use to define their worldview? Since so much of in our world, so much of our um, identity and so much of our perceptual bias is affected by the filter of our gender identity.
Well, fortunately, writing fantasy, I can do whatever the hell I want with worldviews. But I always end up starting with there's always a character who is in some way loosely based on me, personality wise, not necessarily gender wise. So that's kind of always my keystone, whether it's a main character or not. There's always somebody who I can say, okay, this is how I see everything. And so I can take my world, look at how I view stuff, even if that character doesn't make it in the final draft. And I can say, okay, here's the people around him. And lately it's not always a him, which is showing how I've grown. Um, but I say, here's the people around him. Here are his friends. Here's the hero. Here's his relationship to the hero. And then based on my own personal relationships with the people around me, coworkers, friends, acquaintances, strangers, I can start to build my other characters. Um, I actually use a lot of inspiration, again, just bits and pieces from people I know. I mean, my best friend and the co-host of my podcast, Erin, she's always in there somewhere, and she's been guys, women, guys, girls, everything in my worlds. Not saying that my characters are all cookie cutter because they're not. I just pick and choose because in I'm trying to think of what I've done. In Impetigo, It's been so long since I've read the book, I can't remember his name. But the character that was me was a side character, and he was the part of me that actually will go out and do stuff. Whereas in my YA fantasy that's about to come out, um, the character that is based on me is she's brave, but she's more the clever part of me. So it's like I really base so much on my own worldview, which can be really limiting. But I have the same problem as other people. I can look at somebody on TV and go, wait a second, is that a guy or a girl? And so then I project that perception onto them, which obviously that person knows what they are. They know who they are. And I'm like, okay, so if I'm in their head that way, that's what the world looks like. Okay, so it's like I take my perception first, and then just project it out, and then let it evolve. So that's a lot of what I do.
Okay. What would you say is your biggest strength as a writer?
I've actually asked other people this, and I totally agree with them. I can transport you. I can give you the real sense of where you are and that you're not, sitting in a chair or sitting on a bus reading. I make the world happen around you, but without taking 10 pages to describe a windowsill like Jane Austen. Um, I can take the smaller details and paint the bigger picture with them, so your imagination does the rest. So like I've been told, and having read stuff that I wrote 5 years ago that I haven't seen in so long, I can at least make settings come alive. I can make the world itself happen around you.
And what's the biggest challenge or difficulty that you're having with your writing that you're working to overcome right now?
Dialogue. I can write good, snappy dialogue, but all my characters sound the same.
Mm.
My dialogue, I end up writing very, very formally. So giving people different voices is something I've been working on for a couple of years now. And it's because I don't want, the last thing I want is for my characters to suddenly start sounding. Everybody's got an accent. Everybody doesn't need to have an accent. Some, yes, but you don't necessarily need to write that they have an accent. You don't need to have all the, instead of ing, in apostrophe.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be gimmicky, but just
Right.
giving people their own different speech patterns, that's harder for me because I'm not a very good listener.
And what are you doing to overcome that?
Um, a lot of what I've been doing is just basically a couple different exercises. I'll write out my conversation, and then I'll kind of just carry it around with me in my head now that I know what's being said by who. And if I'm, say, talking to you, I'll be thinking, okay, this is the next thing that this person says. And I'll try to think of it how you would say it. Or just write out, some people are gonna, use the fanciest vocabulary they've got.
Mm-hmm.
See if I can fancy up a sentence and just find out what works that way, or think about, what this person's upbringing was. How would they be using the slang, or would they be more like me and enunciating everything? um, and honestly, I watch a lot of TV because everybody has different speech patterns, and it just really and actually watching a lot of like TV shows I'm really familiar with, so I'm not trying to follow plot. I can just focus on how they're talking. That's really helped a lot, actually.
And do you take notes when you do that?
I am not a note taker. I get too cluttered that way. So much of what I do is up here. I tend to be more intuitive, so um, it's like my brain files everything away, but I don't necessarily know what's there until I need it. And then I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I knew this, and then just go use that. It can be frustrating because sometimes I can't call up the information I need, and then I'm like in the middle of writing, I'm like, oh yeah, I needed to do that. It's like my brain is its own alarm system. It's like I said, it can be frustrating, but it also can be kind of hilarious because people ask me questions and I'll answer and be like, wait, how did I know that?
So, where can we find your stuff, and how can we get this book?
Yes. You can find me anywhere you can find AF Grappin. That's AFGRAPPIN. You'll find me, afgrappin.com, Twitter at AFGrappin. My Facebook page is AFGrappin. My email is afgrappin@gmail.com. You can find links to all the books, including the new one, on afgrappin.com under the library tab. You can find Empedigo and Mere Acquaintances on Smashwords. Mere Acquaintances is free there, so if you want Mere Acquaintances, just go there for that one. Empedigo and Mere Acquaintances are also both on Amazon, but I think they're 99 cents there. Trials of Halleck, I'm working on getting out. LUC BERTRAND is available for pre-order on Amazon and only through Amazon right now because it's only coming out an ebook right now. And also, got to shout out the Melting Podcast, POTCAST.com. That's my podcast. We release episodes twice every month, me and my best friend, and it's all based on writing. We do short stories, flash fiction, bloopers, interviews with people like you. Yeah. Yeah. We've had this fancy man on the show.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Raven and the Writing Desk, Gus. Good luck with the book.
It has been a pleasure, sir.